Live from America's finest city. This is Real Talk San Diego on ESPN 1700.
All right, gang, what's happening? You are live in the Secret Stash. I'm your host, Jesse Ibanez, owner of the Greenhouse Group. But we're not talking about getting folks into and out of homes right now because I'm flanked by my man, Robert Robinson, who's going to be laying it down for his group, Hickman and Robinson LLP. And that's what we're doing here in the Stash. We bring some cool local people. We can talk about some cool local stuff. Hopefully leave you a little better than how we found you. And hopefully, Robert, you got some cool stories for us to lay down again today. And that's Real Talk Radio San Diego for you. So, Robert, without further ado, brother, I can't do your story justice, man. Why don't you introduce for yourself who you are, what you do?
All right. Thanks, Jesse. And thanks for having me on the show. Real happy to be here.
You bet, man.
Well, I'm an attorney. I practice business and real estate law. I am owner and managing partner of Hickman and Robinson, a small downtown law firm that practices business and real estate. We do both transactional and litigation matters. And what we do is we represent business owners. Now, a lot of our business owners are in the real estate fields, okay? So we represent developers, builders, contractors, subcontractors. We represent brokers, property management companies, investment companies, investors, and property owners in general. And then, you know, we have a lot of business owners that are not in the real estate fields, okay? And that gets fun. We represent a wide range of businesses, anything from international wireless carriers to dentists and doctors to a small dance studio, fitness company, restaurants. You know, we represent a speedboat tour company, and it gets real fun. It gets real fun to represent all the different types of businesses around town.
Keeps it fresh. Yeah, just like you, brother. You're looking good today.
Thanks, buddy.
You can catch him on the YouTube, by the way, by going to secretstashradio.com. Robert is flexing right now. He's got the clean cut suit, right? Adrian, am I right about this? Good looking young chap. Hey, representing San Diego well, my friend. Happy to have you in the house. So, you know, wrapping out with you about how, you know, you wanted to make a contribution to the lives of anybody who's catching you right now for the first time. You know, maybe they're in the car getting from A to B, you know, laying down some hours right now, punching the clock at work. In any event, you wanted to break this down into your two specialties. And so you thought you could make a great contribution in the realm of business, of helping business owners, and then also a little bit delving into the real estate game.
Yeah,
right?
That's right.
So to kind of make it fun and palpable, like, you know, what are the four things, right, that like all business owners have in common that give rise to basically needing to call you? Right. So how would you head that stuff off at the pass? Like lay it down. What would number one be?
Okay. So all business owners, one of the primary issues that they need to address, and hopefully in the very beginning of opening their business, is what type of business entity to form. Okay.
Right. You're talking about like corporation, right? So like the concept of an LLC, S Corp, C Corp, that kind of thing?
That's right.
Got it. Okay.
Absolutely. So
and it's really confusing, isn't it?
Somewhat. And sometimes people oversimplify it, and then sometimes people overcomplicate it.
Fair enough.
Okay, but it really depends on the subjective situation for a particular business, what's best for them. So
it's kind of like what business you're in, it kind of defaults to maybe this is better for you than this one?
What type of business, and then how you intend to run it, what your future plans are, right? So if you intend to have seed money or potential to sell your business in the future, one type of business entity might be better over another, right? You don't want to be a sole proprietor and not have a business entity when you could potentially have future business owners that you're not even going to know.
It's interesting also because it seems like the genesis for a lot of folks when they go to separate themselves from the sole proprietor is they think about tax advantages.
Right.
They think about like, okay, well, what's the only really break I'm going to get at this? I got to set this thing up to make sure that I'm not giving all my money away to Uncle Sam, right? But that is just the tip of the iceberg, is it not?
That's right.
Yeah.
First and foremost, I think the most important element to forming a business entity is liability protection. Okay. If your business falters, you don't want that mistake to dive into your personal life. You don't want to risk your home, your car, your family, because your business didn't go well.
Yeah, well said. Yeah. So what would be next on that list?
Well, you do have tax flexibility. And I sort of use the term tax flexibility as opposed to tax benefits.
I like that.
Right, because there's also certain detriments if you don't play it right. So I always recommend when forming a business entity to also consult a CPA to make sure that everything on the tax side of things is completely in line with your business goals.
No question. And if that also means that you need a CPA, well then, ding ding, because if you're getting that far into the weeds and you're doing your own stuff on what's that free one that everybody uses or whatever online, zip tax or whatever it's called.
Right.
Yeah, whatever. I'm blowing it. Right now, but you know what I mean. Yeah, right. That the CPA is a critical element to structure everything.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So part and parcel. What's next?
What I think is important is also perpetual existence. So it's not important.
That's a loaded term.
It's not important to everybody. But you had someone on here earlier today talking about I think estate planning, right?
Sure.
So a business entity exists forever, where we don't. Right. So let's say we plan to leave our business to our family or our kids.
Right.
You can transfer ownership of a corporation or an LLC, and that LLC continues to exist. Right. There's steps you need to take within your internal corporate documents or LLC
or if you've
documents.
Got a partner, you might need a buy-sell agreement.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And a buy-sell agreement will define those terms. What happens if something happens to your partner or you?
Does your partner want to be in business with your wife?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So you want to figure that out ahead of time.
Yeah.
It's always easier to come to an agreement when there's not really an issue at stake. When there becomes a problem, it becomes a lot more difficult to resolve those issues. And that brings me to another point that when forming a business entity, whether it be me or someone else, I highly recommend you do consult an attorney. Okay, there's online websites where you can form a business entity for a couple $100 and you receive articles of incorporation in the mail.
Right.
But
and then what?
Right.
Yeah.
I have people come into my office, unfortunately, relatively frequently with a problem.
Yeah.
And they assume that they're protected personally from potential liability, and they say, "Oh, I formed a corporation on so and such website." And I say, okay, let me see your corporate books.
Yeah.
I'll take a look at the corporate book. I'll open it up. There will be an articles of incorporation.
With the thin veil of the claim to be inauthentic. Right.
Right. They may or may not have annual minutes in there.
Not.
But then I'll talk to them and,
Probably not.
ask them about commingling funds. They won't know what that is. They may have not even opened a new business account.
They use their personal credit cards to buy the stuff for the business.
Absolutely. Yeah. So there's a lot that goes into it. In addition to forming the corporation, you need guidance as to how to properly respect the corporation.
No question, because otherwise it's not going to hold up and you're just wasting your money in the first place. So, I mean, in the four elements, like we talk about a place of business, we talk about contracts, but the fourth one really pops off at me. It's about workers.
Okay.
Now lay it on me, right? I mean, like, this is the biggest thing for businesses is other people, right?
Absolutely.
So what can you share with me about that?
Okay. Well, obviously you need people to run a business, and obviously most of the time you need more than just yourself. A common issue that a lot of businesses run into is whether to categorize them as employees or independent contractors.
Right.
Okay. So.
And your CPA is going to have something to say about that too.
Yeah, absolutely. And when first hiring people to work for you, a lot of people get an urge to just classify them as an independent contractor because it seems so much easier. Right. Having employees is sometimes considered expensive. There's employment withholding taxes and such.
Well, let's be honest. I mean, it is. But the question is, are you paying it now or are you going to pay it later?
And that's right. There's a task force out there enforcing people, against businesses that aren't classifying their employees well. And if an independent contractor becomes not so happy with something occurring at the business, you can run into issues there.
Yep.
Employees are afforded rights, especially in California. The labor law really protects employees here. So even if you don't categorize them, it really depends on how you treat them. And there's 18-something elements that goes into the evaluation as to whether someone is an employee or an independent contractor. What the contract says doesn't really matter.
And there's some things about that, right? Some covenants. There's so for example, I know one of them is if you tell it's kind of like Jeff Foxworthy. It's like you might be a redneck. Like if you tell your employee that they got to be into work at a certain time, you might be an employee, right? Like if you're mandating their times and stuff like that. What's another low hanging fruit as kind of an acid test of whether or not they should be an independent contractor?
Yeah, there's a lot of them, and you identified the major ones. The major one is if you're controlling how they work, when they work, what they do, how they do it. then it doesn't matter what you call them, they're an employee.
Right.
Also, if you're providing them a place to work, that's another element. If you're providing them the supplies, then that's another element.
Yeah.
On the converse side, the more specialized the tasks are that they're doing, the more on the independent contractor side that they can be.
Or how they get paid, if it's hourly or if it's by project. That's a big one.
That's right.
So we laid that down, but leave us with the thought of what's the main problem with that? Is it about exposure? How would you get into trouble if you did that wrong?
Well, then you run into problems with the government.
Right.
Okay, so that's the bottom line. So it might start with
which really means this, right?
That's
You're gonna
right.
be paying
Fees, penalties. Businesses can go out of business because of penalties from the EDD.
And that's why we got Robert Robinson in the house right now, man. You're laying it down. I love it. And by the way, you can check him out at hickmanrobinsonlaw.com. That's HICK, man. RobinsonLaw.com. He's all over the internet and the social sphere as well. But coming up, Robert, you're going to get us into a little history lesson, if I can maybe implore you to first tell a little bit about yourself, where you came from, but then more importantly, some of the experiences that you've had about this topic that I know that you're going to want to find out right after this. That's the stash, baby. We got some cool local people talking about some cool local stuff on Real Talk Radio San Diego. We'll be right back.
Hi, it's Courtney with 5-Star Escrow. If you provide 5-star service, your escrow company should too. When you need fast, friendly, and accurate service, think 5-Star Escrow. We're the escrow company of choice for the Friends of Real Talk San Diego, and we're committed to delivering a first-class experience when you need it most, at closing. Why settle for less? 5-Star Escrow, getting your transactions closed and getting you paid on time. Visit us at 5starescrow.com. That's 5starescrow.com.
My man Steve, that's what we got the stash, Steve. I appreciate you, brother. Always keeping it fresh. And this is the Secret Stash, which means we're grabbing some of the coolest local people from around town, hopefully talking about some cool stuff to leave you a little bit better than how we found you. And in the house today, we got Robert Robinson, owner of Hickman and Robinson LLP. Robert's a lawyer, and he specializes in practicing business and real estate law. And you kind of got us into the 30,000 foot before the break here, but I want to get a little deeper now in the specificity. So first, before we do that, where'd you come from? Here you are in San Diego. I know you practice downtown now, but what was a cool little anecdote you can tell us about how you got here?
Well, okay, so I went to law school here in San Diego, undergrad too, right? So I moved.
What school did you go to?
San Diego State.
Adam, my man, alma mater.
Go Aztecs.
You bet.
And then I stayed here, of course.
We won the baseball championship, by the way.
Yes,
did you see
we
that
did.
come back?
Yes, we did.
That was awesome.
Yes, we did. And the basketball teams have some great recruits coming.
Yep.
Okay, so, and of course, I wanted to stay here for law school. Can't leave San Diego, so I went to California Western School of Law.
Yep.
Graduated in 2003, and during law school, I worked at all different types of firms, large firms, small firms. And, I found that working at the small firm really let me have the client contact and the experience and the courtroom experience sooner rather than later, which is what I wanted.
Because the big firm, that was left to the sharks up top or something like that?
Yeah, there's just a higher ladder.
Higher ladder. Fair enough. Okay.
So I went to work for a small firm in La Jolla, doing the same thing that I'm doing now, doing business law and real estate law. Got a lot of great experience at that firm. Took me about 5 years before I felt ready to go out on my own. Being ready, a couple of things. One, I needed to make sure that I had the experience and knowledge base to represent my clients well.
Right.
Okay. Second, to make sure that I had somewhat of a client base so that it wasn't a complete financial risk. Just being real there.
Yeah.
And opened up my own practice about 6 years ago now. Okay. Now, I always wanted to open up my own firm. I've always had a business mind, hence, my business law practice. But I always felt like there was a way that I could practice law that might be a little bit different than some of the other firms.
Good on you.
Okay. So
what came to the top of that list? What was the big need that you filled?
I think first and foremost was the fact that when representing business owners, whether they be in the real estate fields or not, is that there's a lot that goes into legal representation that might not be considered a legal element, but there's a lot of business elements that go into representation. Okay. A client's business interests might not be entirely consistent with the legal recommendation. So if an attorney isn't evaluating that and helping the client come to a conclusion, I don't think an attorney is doing the best job possible for that client. I think you have to listen to the client's needs and help them adjust your strategy, your legal strategy in accordance therewith, right? So for example, in transactional matters, the client and pretty much everybody in the transaction, they don't get paid unless the transaction gets done, okay? One thing that lawyers are really good at is blowing up a transaction, right? You show any of us attorneys a contract and we can find 100 things wrong with it. Okay. But if all we do is find things wrong with that without finding solutions or evaluating the risks, the benefits versus the detriments with the clients as to each of those items, then we can't come up with the solution that works best. Okay. So I really want.
Preaching the gospel right now, Robert. I love it.
Right.
Yeah. Stay in it. Stay in it.
So I just want to make so my goal has always been to really focus on the ultimate goals of the client. Okay, and then enlighten the situation with respect to the legal ramifications and come to a goal to really make the client's business successful.
I love that as the premise, and I appreciate you going back, telling a little more about yourself so we can find ourselves within your story. But, dude, give me some examples. Like, in the last hour, we were dying over some of the stuff. This is one of my favorite things about having someone like yourself on with the experience that you have. Is I know you got some good stories. So,
yeah.
So you identified a need. I know that didn't just come out of some whimsical machination that you dreamt up, in the wee hours of the night. Like that came from something. So what's a good example you can share us with?
Okay, so for example, take something real simple. Take a residential sales transaction.
Here we go.
Okay.
My bread and butter.
Almost everybody's involved in one or many in their lives. So you run into a situation in a residential transaction where you have a title report, say.
Okay.
And the title report identifies potential clouds or liens on title.
The title basically describes, what the reality of the situation is. Like, who owns the property? What is the property in question?
Right.
Okay, good.
And it could be anything. It could be any issue in a residential real estate transaction. And in California, as opposed to many other states, there's not always an attorney involved. Usually it's just an agent, mortgage broker.
Yeah.
And if there's becomes a legal issue that an agent might not be qualified to render, they normally refer it out to an attorney.
Of course they do.
Now, what I've seen in the past is that attorney verifying the issue, verifying the title issue, identifying all the risks associated with it, and then sending that opinion back to the client without any consideration for the ultimate goal of the transaction. And what the result is a canceled transaction, right? And then the parties are arguing over the return of the deposit.
It's an interesting perspective.
And it just puts a halt.
Yeah.
But then what happens is the agents, that happens to them once or twice or three times, and they become less likely to refer legal issues to attorneys, which is
like
a whole...
where all conversations go to die.
Right.
Yeah.
So it becomes an issue in itself, making agents hesitant to refer issues to an attorney. So that the right way to handle it is to identify the issue, but present it along concurrently with potential solutions. Okay? So if you need a quiet title, even if you need to file a lawsuit for quiet title...
What's a quiet title, by the way?
Okay, so going back to a cloud or lien on title, a quiet title action is an action that you would file a lawsuit to remove that cloud from title or remove that lien that shouldn't be there. Okay. Oftentimes they're unopposed. Okay. Now, if you file an action that's unopposed, yeah, that might cost you $5,000. But if you're buying a $500,000 property, then it's not that big a deal at the end of the day. Right. So there's solutions out there. And I just, we're a real solution-based law firm. So,
what comes up for me is even as much as I want to champion that perspective, I know from the transactional side of the conversation, I'll raise my hand, I'll put in but a vote and say that does not seem to be the spirit most of the time, right? The spirit tends to be, they're wrong, here's the reason why they're wrong, and then the other side having to create a defense around it. And then all that happens to the parties is that they then dig in respectively. You get further away from the goal and the outcome, right?
That's right.
So I love that spirit that you suggested. But what came up for me organically was it still requires the other side play that way. So, right. So even if you're being the cool guy, the guy or gal doesn't really want to be or incentivized or have the capacity to be the cool guy or girl, then what?
Well, it's all a matter of presentation. Okay. So...
Which, by the way, you present well, right, Adrian? In the house, Robert. That's right.
There's a lot that goes into it. So a lot of it is making sure, it obviously benefits the client to have a good agent that understands and is in good communication with.
Imagine that.
Right? That is in good communication with the other side. That is good communication with any potential lender that's involved. And for the attorney to also anticipate potential pushback. All right. For example, if there is an issue which needs to be addressed that might drag out the escrow a little bit longer than desired, that issue that they're addressing would likely need to be addressed by any future alternative buyer too. So as long as you communicate that this isn't just an issue with this particular client, but it would be an issue for future clients, something that would have to be disclosed to future potential buyers. Handling it now is often the best situation of all parties. That's just an example, but usually you can find a benefit for all parties involved.
It's a good point too. I'm going to riff on this before we run out of time here, coming up on a break. This is something that I feel like needs clarification. Like, let's say that you're in the discovery process as a buyer on a home, and you find out something, and you guys can't agree on the repair or the remediation, whatever, and the transaction cancels, so disintegrates. Okay. Does the seller then have to disclose that to future buyers, whatever the buyer discovered?
Yes. If anything that is material to a sale has to be disclosed.
Right.
So if one buyer is canceling because of a certain item, then almost inherently that's a material fact that needs to be disclosed.
Thank you, Robert Robertson. I appreciate that, brother. I feel like this is something that needs a little whip in the you-know-where because, I don't know, I just feel like a lot of agents don't feel like that's the case. And they just feel like, the buyer figured that out and kind of going to go about along our game here. And then that's a big one because then the seller, unknowingly, is the one who's really going to hold that bill. Theoretically speaking, metaphorically speaking, right? Because if then the discovery process isn't yielded, and sometimes it might not get caught or whatever, but if it does, that's one of the only ways a seller can ever really get themselves in some hot water.
That's right.
Right? Non-disclosure?
That's right.
Hey, Robert, listen, man, I appreciate you. You're laying it down right now. Robert Robinson in the house from Hickman and Robinson LLP. You can catch him online at hickmanrobinsonlaw.com. And coming up, my man, we're going to get into more of that stuff, which, of course, is my sweet spot.
Yep.
Helping folks get into and out of homes, talking about real estate practice, and also what are some things that you need to look out for as a residential home purchase to actually get Robert involved in the first place. That's what we're doing in the stash, baby. Leaving you a little better than how we found you. Real Talk Radio San Diego. We'll be right back.
Hi, it's Courtney with 5-Star Escrow. If you provide 5-star service, your escrow company should too. When you need fast, friendly, and accurate service, think 5-Star Escrow. We're the escrow company of choice for the Friends of Real Talk San Diego, and we're committed to delivering a first-class experience when you need it most, at closing. Why settle for less? 5-Star Escrow, getting your transactions closed and getting you paid on time. Visit us at 5starescrow.com. That's 5starescrow.com.
Right on time and live, Steve. That's what I love about you, brother. How about Steve, by the way, huh? A little round of applause for my man Steve inside the booth, laying it down. Keeping the Real Talk Radio fans live, Steve. That's what we love about you. And you in the stash, baby. I'm your host, Jesse Ibanez, and we got some cool local people talking about some cool local stuff. Hoping to leave you a little better than how we found you. And in the house today, I got Robert Robinson. He is the owner of Hickman and Robinson LLP. Of course, he is a lawyer, and he's educating us about all things business practice and then real estate, which, of course, is something that's super near and dear to where I'm going to be as soon as we're leaving the studio here today, my man Robert. So allow me to put you in the hot seat a little bit. Okay. Let's get into these weeds. So inside of a residential home purchase, right, even though we're protected by all the contracts and the years of litigation stuff still goes wrong. Right?
Absolutely, yep.
So what are some snakes in the grass? Let's say that you're in a real estate transaction right now, something ain't going right, or maybe you want to hedge against the bet of something potentially going wrong and when you're planning on doing, etc. Like, when do you get involved?
Okay. There's numerous points where I can get involved. For example, I can get involved in the beginning. There's a lot of buyers from the East Coast or out of state where attorneys are involved in every transaction, and that's just what they're comfortable with.
It's more commonplace.
That's just what they're comfortable with. So they
and
come
real
out.
Estate agents are not attorneys.
That's right.
Be very clear about that.
So they come out here to California, buy a property, and then they're surprised to learn that attorney's not involved, and they want one involved. So sometimes I get involved right from the get-go. But the majority of the time I get involved when there's an issue. So like we discussed, when there's a potential title issue, when the title report becomes involved. if after a transaction is canceled and there's a dispute as to whether the deposit is collectible.
Now, the title thing, let's go back on that real quick. So is that like in a situation where maybe the transaction didn't have title insurance? Because that's one of the main reasons why you have title insurance, right? It kind of protects you against something going wrong, someone not pushing a button, someone's name not being, that kind of stuff.
That's right. So it could either be that a property was purchased without title insurance, say somebody had a transaction, purchased it from a friend and they didn't feel they needed title insurance. They just simply recorded a deed. Mm-hmm. Okay. So that brings up issues. And other times title issues come into play when a title company issues their preliminary title report and there's exceptions on those reports, mm-hmm. and they're not willing to insure certain exceptions, such as access is a common one. If so, there might not be access for a property, or there might not be a properly recorded easement agreement.
Well said.
So oftentimes I'll be brought in for those issues.
Okay, good. So inside of that space, right? What are some of like the most common problems or delays or something that you find in a typical residential home purchase?
Well, delays. Nowadays, for the last several years, I would say the most common cause of a delay is getting the loan. Okay.
Yeah. You got a point for that right there, brother. Right. That was me giving you a point.
All right.
Yeah.
Got to rack those up.
Yeah.
So the lenders have all these additional requirements that they have to satisfy, and they're overly concerned with satisfying their checkbox rather than the deadlines associated with the transaction. Okay. So oftentimes a buyer and seller want to push, get a deal closed. There's all these deadlines. There's all these contingency removal deadlines. But the lender's on a different schedule. The lender's on a 45-day schedule.
And the contract's written for 30 days.
Right. Or oftentimes a contingency removal is 17 days. So depending upon how it's written.
Right.
So oftentimes that will be the delay. That can often be solved by hiring the right mortgage broker that to give you to really give you a good pre-qual, so it's not some sort of cursory letter that says, or
actually imagine a pre-approval even better, right? That they actually took a look at everything and then just take your word for it over a phone call.
Absolutely. And then hiring a good agent that is actually communicating with the mortgage broker, working as a team. I think that's important, that both an agent and a mortgage. I know your company does that quite often.
Imagine that. Imagine actually a one-stop shop, right, Adrian? Yeah.
Right. So I think that's great what you guys are doing. I think more people should do that. So the communication, a good communication between the mortgage broker and the agent can help facilitate and limit those delays.
So, I'm a big, hero's journey kind of guy. I love getting wrapped up in a good story. Tell me that you got a good story of when somebody totally blew it. Or maybe, they had the best intentions. I know a lot of times we meet folks who, ended up, we're on their second incarnation. We're like the breakup. We're like the rebound agent where their mom or dad referred them the person they've used forever, and they just didn't get it done. They didn't get along. They were too old school, whatever the case may be. All right, God bless them. But so what's a good example of where this can go horribly wrong and they end up in your hands?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what. In a real estate transaction, there's a lot of deadlines, okay? You read that standard California Associated Realtor residential purchase agreement, and there's a list of deadlines. Mm-hmm. Oftentimes, the parties involved or the agents involved will be so attached to those deadlines that sometimes they overlook some of the steps and the real requirements that are really going to benefit the buyer. Okay, so oftentimes that 17-day contingency is upon us, and the buyer is fearful that they'll lose the property if they don't remove the contingencies, perhaps from pressure from the seller's agent or what have you. So, I've run into situations quite often, where someone will come to me because they ran into an issue after they removed the contingency. Okay, right. So
because then what you're not saying, and I'll spell it out for you, is then that's when the money's on the line. Right? So to get a home into contract in the first place, this is in California way, you got to put some skin in the game. We call it our earnest money deposit. And it's usually a minimum of 1% of the purchase price. So if you're buying the $500,000 home, like you talked about earlier in the segment, that's about $5,000 large, if not sometimes even more. Like they want you to tune that up. And after you remove the contingencies, which actually right now takes place usually on day 21 of a typical 30-day escrow since they made the revision there earlier this year, then your money's on the line. So if you don't close, and it's either by your own volition or your fault, the seller has a right to keep your earnest money deposit.
That's right.
So it is intense.
That's right. And then, I had a matter recently where there was a $25,000 earnest money deposit. And
that's about as fun as death at a birthday party.
All contingencies were removed.
Sure they were.
And then after the fact, they realized they couldn't get insurance on the property.
Oh, it's brutal.
Okay. And they wanted to get out. They didn't want to buy $1 million property that they couldn't insure. That was just what the buyer didn't want to do.
Yeah.
But they felt that they removed all contingencies. So the buyer's goal in that situation was not to continue the transaction. It was to get out of the transaction. So they came to me. They had me review the entire file. That's what I asked to do. And what we did was I actually were able to identify two particular items that were not disclosed. Okay, that required disclosure. So there's a part of the contract that says even if you remove the contingencies, if there's future disclosures, and there's also common law that supports this. If there's future disclosures after removal of the contingencies, you can rely on that to still get out of the contract in certain circumstances.
Now, are you at liberty to share what those were? I think that's fascinating.
Well, in this particular transaction, they did not disclose prior rental income. And then the rental agreements, because there was actually a tenant on the property.
Oh, wow.
Okay, so they produced the lease agreement, so they thought they satisfied that. But the lease agreement doesn't necessarily satisfy that disclosure requirement. You're also supposed to produce the original applications and a profit and loss statement related to renting that property.
Wow. That's fascinating. I don't think I even knew that. So you actually have to share the profit and loss with the buyer, potentially?
Yeah, right.
Even though that's your own private kind of mojo, tax mojo? Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Right. So you don't have to disclose necessarily the tax part of it, but you do have to disclose the profit and loss part of it. It's material. So the expenses that you're incurring related to the renting the property is just as relevant as how much you're getting for renting it, the rental amount. And
that's another great example too, because, for myself, my own heuristic is, you move through this space based on experience. And in experience, normally the rental agreement suffices. And what's funny about this, and this is why you have a job, brother, and a very important role, is that it does until it doesn't. It does until something goes wrong. And then then it's all revealed to everybody that, oh, no, that actually wasn't the preponderance of disclosure required. You actually have to give this too.
That's right. And in this particular instance, what was so notable was that there was very significant losses associated with the renting of the property because of many problems that they had with the property that was not disclosed in the other disclosures. So
I love that thought, man. That's why I love those stories too, because now I can even find myself in them, And I'm sure if someone's listening right now and they're thinking to themselves, I'm buying a property right now, and all I saw was the lease agreement too. Now's your chance to go back and be like, yo, hey, we got to see some P&Ls on this thing too. Because I was listening to my man Robert Robertson. I keep calling you Robertson. It's like a Robert Robertson. It's just kind of flowing right off there. Maybe you should change your last name. It's got a little ring to it.
Maybe.
A little Johnny. Now, in the meantime, he's going to stay Robert Robinson, and you can catch him, of course, at HickmanRobinsonLaw.com. Robert, coming up, brother. I know we're cruising through this, but I'm dying to hear what your free business structure consultation is going to look like, because you in the stash, and when you in the stash, you always leave something cool for the people that just spent the last hour with you to make sure that they can go discover you for themselves. And speaking of discovery, one last time, you can catch them online at HickmanRobinsonLaw.com. And that's Real Talk Radio, baby. And we'll be right back after this quick break.
Hi, it's Courtney with 5-Star Escrow. If you provide 5-star service, your escrow company should too. When you need fast, friendly, and accurate service, think 5-Star Escrow. We're the escrow company of choice for the Friends of Real Talk San Diego, and we're committed to delivering a first-class experience when you need it most, at closing. Why settle for less? 5-Star Escrow, getting your transactions closed and getting you paid on time. Visit us at 5starescrow.com. That's 5starescrow.com.
Steve gets up, Steve gets down. That's right. Come on, man. You didn't know you were going to get me singing at the stash, did you? That's my man, Robert Robinson, owner of HickmanRobinsonLaw.com. And listen, man, I love what you've been laying down so far. The truth is, I love it, I should say, when personally I have an experience that leaves me even better than how you found me. I learned something new in the last segment. So I know if you're catching us live right now on the ESPN Radio 1700 dial, that Robert is laying it down, leaving you better than how he found all of us. And there's one final chapter to this book I'd love for you to expound on a little bit. It has to do with something that only you do. And I listen, man, I swim in these pools, right? I know a lot of lawyers, and I know a lot of real estate lawyers, and I know a lot of folks who do this stuff. I don't know if I've ever met anybody who has as cool of an initial meetup structure than you do. You call it your business structure consultation, right? Appropriately flagged. But tell us really what that's all about, though, and why that's so cool.
Okay. Yeah, and that's it's optional, and not everybody for some reason wants to do that, but it's a service that we offer. Okay. It takes a little longer than initial consultations.
Right, which is why a lot of people don't do it.
Not everybody wants to do it, but I think it's really beneficial to the clients.
No question.
To have their attorney come out to the place of business for a consultation.
Right.
Okay. So that couple benefits. One, when a new client comes in, they don't always have all the information that they need for that for the initial consult. They don't necessarily have all their contracts. I'll ask a client if they have any, do you have any other contract besides this service agreement? And they'll say no. But then I'll go out to their place of business, see that they're signing contracts with all their customers on an hourly basis. And I'll be like, what about that one? And they're like, oh, is that a contract? Well, yes. Whatever agreement you're entering into with your clients on a very frequent basis is another contract that we need to evaluate to see if it adequately protects you. So if I'm on site and I can see how not only is everything there for me,
right,
and it makes it more efficient, but I can help the client identify potential issues. Okay, they might think at a consultation in my office, they might think they only have 2 employees, but then when I go on site and I see 10 additional workers, I'll be, who are those people? And they're like, oh, they're just doing additional work. I'm like, well, do you pay them? And they say, yes, they do. I'm like, okay, well, let's evaluate your relationship with those people,
Or just the heuristic of the fact that, they come to your office, they're like, oh, okay, I brought my file. And then you're like, oh, what about this little thing that's like a writer and an addendum or whatever, insert, fill in the blank, whatever it is. And if they're in their office, they can be like, oh, and then they reach over their right shoulder because it's all germane to their space. They start thumbing through some stuff, and then they produce what you're asking for.
That's right. And it's just more of an all-inclusive type of consultation than oftentimes when they come in, they're just focused on one issue. If they're looking for a more all-inclusive type of consultation, it's really beneficial to have an attorney come out on site, for a few hours operate as sort of quasi in-house counsel and really sort of help identify potential issues. And, to be able to head off future issues I think is really important for businesses, and that's consistent with our goal of truly helping businesses succeed.
And it's not a panacea. Just by going out to the spot of the place of business, it's not going to reveal everything that needs to be known. Otherwise, everybody would do it. But there's always something that comes up dynamic with the actual meeting. Like, for example, when we go to meet with folks that are thinking about maybe, figuring out how much their home is worth, or they're considering selling or whatever, that first meeting is always at the house, because there's so much that's born in that discovery process of just physically being in the space. I mean, I find myself half the time talking people out of listing their home after I get a chance to go to the house.
Right.
Truthfully, people are like, oh, well, hold on, I thought that's what you're... No, well, as long as it's in the best interest of the client. Maybe it's something simple like, hey, here's 5 or 6 things that if it were my home that I would do, physically, because if you do those things, you're going to get, tenfold back out of it versus these things having to account for them, simple stuff like that. But you wouldn't have that opportunity if you weren't physically in the space. Is that kind of true for you as well?
Yes, absolutely. And depending upon the situation for the client, it's just easier for me to identify issues. If I'm there, if I'm seeing how they do business, just so many more issues that I can identify. And like you say, we don't purport to identify in a brief 2 to 4 hour consultation every potential legal issue that could come to fruition, but we can identify more, and more is better.
And I love that thought too. So a lot of this comes back to loop all the way back to the beginning, like the type of business entity. Mm-hmm. Like we were talking about S corps, C corps, LLCs. When you're physically in the spot, you have a better idea of which way that flag is blowing. Because you could be able to say, okay, I'm getting a better feel for this business. if I was just on the phone, I would have probably went with what you said, which was this. But now that I'm here, I have XYZ that came up. Now let's consider that.
Right. So as an attorney, the first step before giving a recommendation is information collection.
Right.
So that's another reason why I prefer to go out there, is because I can collect more information. The more information I have, the better service I can provide to my clients.
Bingo, which helps both of you guys. Let's be honest.
Yes, right.
Right. Okay, and then also, if it's a place of business, you can discuss the lease and the terms and stuff like that, right?
Absolutely. A lease is a huge part of the business. I can afford a couple $1,000s a month. It's not that big a deal. But what about the term of the lease? Is it a 5-year term? If it's a 5-year term, then that's a $120,000 contractor signing. It's not a $2,000 contractor signing. So,
with personal guarantees often.
Yeah. So, and personal guarantees, oftentimes, business owners won't realize that the guarantee is not just for the rent payment, it's for every obligation in the lease. So if the lease requires the tenant to be responsible for, say, ADA compliance, and ADA compliance requires a $50,000 ramp or an elevator or something of that sort, you're personally on the hook for that, even if your business can't afford it.
Yummy. I love that stuff. We talked about contracts. I think that was kind of implied. Workers. We expounded on that a little bit in the second segment.
Right. So
what else? What else really? Yeah.
So for workers, when I'm out there, I can actually see what they're doing. I can see whether they're being controlled, even if the client says they are or not. We hit the major parts that all businesses have in common, such as the business entity, like you said, the contracts, the workers. And then we look for anything that's in particular to their type of business. Okay. So there's local codes, for example, that regulate a dance studio and what they can have in their contracts that won't apply to other types of businesses. So we try to look for those particular issues too.
I love that thought. And I would say the big crescendo of the entire thing, I'm even gonna lay this down, dude. Typically when somebody goes to get one of these from you, it costs how much?
About $1,000.
That's about $1,000. And you're gonna do what for Secret Stash listeners?
For your listeners, I'm gonna do it for free. For the first dozen, there's always a caveat. I can't do it forever. But for the first dozen in San Diego County, local businesses, supporting local businesses, I want to come out there. I want to help.
I love that thought. And that's exactly why we had you on the show today, Robert. I appreciate that. That is a great gift, my man. So what I'm going to count on from you right now, Secret Stash Nation, is write down this man's website address. If you're not sitting in front of a computer right now or on your smartphone, it's HickmanRobinsonLaw.com. And if you don't take advantage of his, be the first 12, right?
That's right.
To take advantage of his free, successful, business structure consultation, whatever you want to call it, right? Where you basically come out and you lay down all of the foundational tracks for what people need to have in place, and then some of the things like you call them like pitfalls or snakes in the grass of things you didn't even know that you didn't even know, to make sure you're setting yourself up for success. Then, man, I don't know what to tell you, because that's free money right there, brother. $1,000 per, that's $12,000. Robert's laying out for us right now today. So, Robert, if I don't need to say this too many times, I'll make sure I say it once with profundity. My man, thank you so much for coming in. HickmanRobinsonLaw.com. Did you have fun?
Had a great time. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it, Jesse.
You bet, man. What do you want to leave for someone who's finding you right now for the first time? A little parting shot.
Gosh, I don't know. Hit me up. I want to talk. I want to help. HickmanRobinsonLaw.com. If you want to take advantage of the giveaway, go to my website, click on Contact Us, reference Jesse's Stash, and we'll get you set up.
Sounds good, brother. And that's all we got. Thank you for hanging out in the Stash. We'll be back here next Tuesday at 10 a.m. for more cool local people talking about some cool local stuff. Real Talk Radio San Diego. We'll be right back.